The only thing louder than the frogs by the lake that morning was the sound of Cynthia Kreel's high heels stabbing across my dock like she owned it. "Nick," she called, waving a clipboard like it was a sword. "We need to talk. This is a serious violation." I set my coffee down on the railing and turned slowly. "Violation of what, Cynthia?" She adjusted her oversized sunglasses like she was prepping for battle. "Per HOA regulations, Section 7, subsection B, you cannot, I repeat, cannot make modifications to shared property without approval." I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure my dock's not shared property," she scoffed. "The lake is under HOA jurisdiction, and so are all structures that extend into it. That includes your dock, and the new steps you added last week. Absolutely unauthorized." I had replaced 2 rotting planks and added steps so my son, Dylan, could fish without tripping. It wasn't exactly a marina. Cynthia clicked her pen and started scribbling something on the clipboard. "This is your 3rd infraction this year. 1 more and the board will vote on a lien against your property." "Hold up," I said, stepping down toward her. "You're threatening my house over a couple new boards on a dock I built before the HOA was even formed." She gave me a tight, faux sympathetic smile. "Rules are rules, Nick. You agreed to them when you moved here." "No," I said calmly. "I bought this place 10 years ago." "You and your little committee didn't even exist until 3 years ago." She tapped the clipboard. "We've since annexed the lake as part of the HOA-controlled common area." That's when I knew something was off. "You annexed the lake," I repeated. "You mean the same lake that's state-managed and listed on the county registry as public water?" Cynthia's smile faltered for half a second, but she recovered fast. "That's irrelevant. Our map clearly shows I cut her off." "Your map isn't the law, Cynthia." She narrowed her eyes. "You'll be hearing from the HOA's attorney, and I suggest you remove the steps before we fine you again." I watched her march back up the gravel path, the clipboard swinging like a weapon at her side. My gut told me this wasn't just about a dock. Cynthia had been trying to flex her authority more and more lately, telling neighbors where to park, what color their garden chairs could be, even measuring lawn heights with a ruler. But threatening my house over a dock, that was crossing a line. I walked back inside, grabbed Dylan's school backpack off the counter, and set it on a chair. Then I flipped open my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long. The lake wasn't just public, it was listed under the state's Department of Environmental Resources. Not even the county could claim jurisdiction, let alone a neighborhood HOA, so the next day I filed a request for a hearing at the local courthouse. If Cynthia wanted a fight, she just picked the wrong dock to mess with. 2 days after filing the hearing request, I was elbow-deep in a box of files when I noticed a black SUV idling outside my house. It had been parked there on and off since the dock incident, always with someone pretending to check their phone. This time, the driver rolled down the window and raised a camera toward my house. I stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. "You need something?" I asked. The driver lowered the camera slowly. "Just documenting for the HOA," he said. "Inspection purposes." "You don't work for the HOA," I said flatly. He hesitated, then pulled away without another word. 10 minutes later, I was at the county assessor's office. The woman at the front desk, Marla, remembered me from a property boundary inquiry I'd made last year. "Back again?" she asked, typing something into a terminal. "What are we looking at this time?" "Need parcel records for lots bordering Lake Lorne," I said. "Specifically on the HOA's claims over it." She raised an eyebrow. "They trying to zone the lake now?" "They already did," I said. "I want to know if they had help from someone in your office." Marla rolled her chair to a back cabinet and returned with a thick folder. "Everything filed on that lake since the subdivision was built. You're going to want to look at this page." She pointed to an easement agreement from 15 years ago, which clearly stated that the lake was under state jurisdiction and could not be claimed or developed by private entities without approval from the Environmental Board. "They never got that approval," I said. "Nope," Marla replied. "And if they mapped it differently, they filed a fraudulent plat." That word fraudulent carried weight, enough to justify my next stop. I drove straight to the office of a local attorney, Sheila Darnell. She specialized in property law and had a reputation for dismantling shady HOA tactics. She was in the middle of reviewing a zoning dispute when I walked in, but after I dropped the easement agreement on her desk, she waved her paralegal off. "Sit down," she said, already flipping through the pages. "Tell me everything." I laid it out, the dock, the threats, the SUV, the clipboard brigade, and especially the map annexation. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and tapped her pen against the document. "This is bigger than a dock," she said. "If they submitted altered boundary maps to enforce authority they never had, that's fraud, possibly criminal." I nodded. "Can we bring them in front of the zoning board?" "Better," she said, standing up. "We bring in the state, this lake's protected." If they falsely claimed ownership, they not only misrepresented jurisdiction, they potentially violated conservation law. Within 48 hours, Sheila had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning commission and forwarded documentation to the state environmental enforcement office. That same afternoon, a state investigator named Greg Doyle called me. "We've had our eye on that HOA," he said. "You just gave us the missing piece. Can we meet at your place tomorrow morning?" At precisely 9 the next day, Doyle arrived in a gray sedan with state plates. He wore a windbreaker with the Department of Environmental Resources seal and carried a camera, clipboard, and a small drone. "Mind if I fly this over the lake?" he asked. "Need aerial footage for our case file." "Be my guest," I said. He launched the drone from my backyard, captured footage of the entire shoreline, then landed it on my dock. "So far, everything you've said checks out," Doyle said. "That dock predates the HOA by years, and more importantly, it's entirely on your parcel, extending into public water. They've got no jurisdiction here." "Then how did they get a map showing otherwise?" I asked. He pulled out a folded document. "We seized this from the HOA's filings with the county zoning office. It's a modified plat map. See this shaded area. They extended the boundary lines by about 50 feet into the lake." "That's not just dishonest," I said. "That's deliberate," Doyle nodded. "We agree, and we're flagging it as a criminal submission. We're bringing in the AG's office." That night, I returned home to find a notice taped to my front door, another violation from the HOA. This time, it claimed I had hosted unauthorized government activity on HOA property. That was the last straw. I walked straight to my garage, pulled out the wireless trail cam I used for deer season, and pointed it directly at the path leading up from the lake. Then I downloaded the last 2 weeks of footage from my home security system, every visit from Cynthia, the SUV driver, and even one clip showing someone measuring my dock with a retractable tape in the middle of the night. At the hearing the following week, the courtroom was packed. Cynthia sat at the front with 2 other board members, all dressed like they were attending a business gala. I was seated with Sheila, while Doyle and a state prosecutor sat just behind us. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Keller, entered briskly and opened with a bang. "I've reviewed the state's findings, the county records, and your complaint, Mr. Lorne. Before we even get to the dock, I want to address the HOA's submission of a falsified plat map. Miss Kreel, would you care to explain?" Cynthia stood slowly. Her voice was steady at first. "Your Honor, we believed the map was accurate. It was provided to us by a consultant from the developer's original plans." "Interesting," Judge Keller said, tapping her gavel lightly. "Because the original developer's plans are in this folder and they show no such boundary extension. What you submitted was altered, and under state law that's considered filing false documentation a felony." Gasps rippled through the room. Cynthia's hands trembled as she adjusted her papers. "We didn't intend. Intent is not a requirement for this charge," the judge said. "The fact that you used this map to issue fines and threaten property liens makes it worse. You acted on it." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor," The state is prepared to open a separate investigation into HOA board members for fraud, falsification of land use documents, and harassment of private citizens under color of authority. Cynthia sat down hard, her face drained of color. As for the dock, Judge Keller continued, the court finds no violation. The structure is entirely on Mr. Lorne's property and extends into a public lake. The HOA has no authority over it or the water. She turned back to me. Mr. Lorne, any damages you wish to pursue can be filed in civil court, but as far as this court is concerned, your property rights have been violated. I nodded, but I was already thinking ahead. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a local station approached me. Mr. Lorne, any comment on the HOA's actions? Just one, I said. Power doesn't come from a clipboard and a fake map. It comes from the law and neighbors who aren't afraid to stand up. Behind me, Doyle was already on the phone coordinating further interviews, and Cynthia. She was escorted out a side exit by a county officer. The dock looked the same when I got home, but something had changed. Cars slowed as they passed, neighbors waved with a little more enthusiasm, and my son came running out from the house holding a fishing rod. "Can we go down now?" he asked. I ruffled his hair. "Grab your tackle box, I think the lake's finally ours again." The following week, my mailbox started overflowing, not with fines this time, but with letters. Handwritten notes, some from people I didn't even know that well, thanking me. Turns out, plenty of other homeowners had been quietly dealing with Cynthia's board for months, even years, but no one had ever challenged them head-on. A woman from 3 streets over wrote that she'd been fined for keeping her mother-in-law's wheelchair ramp up past a temporary disability window. An elderly couple thanked me for standing tall after being ordered to remove their vegetable garden, something they'd tended since the day they moved in. But not everything was thank you cards and neighborly waves. 2 houses down, a man named Kent, who used to be tight with the HOA board, suddenly stopped making eye contact. His wife, Linda, who once co-chaired the HOA's Aesthetic Compliance Committee, began planting shrubs along the entire edge of their lot facing mine like they were building a leafy barrier to block out the fallout. And late one evening, I found a rock lodged in my porch steps. Someone had wrapped it in a printout of the court's decision and scrawled a threat across the top in red marker. I took it straight to Officer Rivas, who was already assigned to monitor ongoing fallout from the HOA investigation. He took one look at it and asked, "Mind if we install a pole cam on the corner?" I didn't. By Thursday morning, Greg Doyle and the state prosecutor had returned to the neighborhood, this time with 2 representatives from the Department of Public Integrity. They weren't here for the lake. They were investigating financial records tied to the HOA's legal fund and discovered something that made everyone's jaw clench. "Nick," Doyle said as we stood near my garage, "we found routing documents showing the board redirected homeowner dues into a private account labeled Maintenance Escrow. Thing is, that account was opened under Cynthia Kreel's name and doesn't match any registered vendor or service provider." "How much are we talking?" I asked. "More than $200,000 over 3 years, I exhaled slowly. "That explains the new Lexus. And the country club memberships paid directly from the same account," he added. "We've got subpoenas going out as we speak." This just went from zoning fraud to wire fraud and embezzlement. By sunset, a squad car and a pair of unmarked cruisers pulled into the HOA's community office, a converted ranch house that had once been a model home. I watched from the edge of the street as officers escorted Cynthia and 2 board members out the front door. Her blazer sleeves were rolled up, and she was shouting something about procedural overreach and board immunity, but her voice cracked halfway through. The neighborhood was quiet. Watching, no one stepped forward to defend her. The next morning, I got a knock at the door. It was Sheila, my attorney, holding a manila folder and wearing an expression I hadn't seen on her before, measured but distinctly satisfied. "They're offering a settlement," she said. "A big one." I didn't open the folder right away. They're trying to avoid a class action lawsuit, Sheila continued. The insurance company is spooked. They know if even half the homeowners file for damages, it could bankrupt the HOA entirely. I stepped onto the porch and leaned against the railing. They deserve worse, I said. They're going to get worse. This is just the beginning. I nodded once and finally opened the folder. The offer was large enough to cover legal fees, dock repairs, and then some. But more importantly, it came with a clause. The HOA leadership was to step down permanently, effective immediately. If they refused, the insurance company would pull coverage and the HOA would lose its legal standing. They're finished, Sheila said. But I wasn't done. I spent the next week organizing a neighborhood meeting not at the community center, which was still locked down under investigation, but at my own backyard. We set up folding chairs, string lights, and a borrowed PA system from the local church. By 7 that evening, more than 40 homeowners had shown up, some with clipboards, others just curious. I stood on the low deck with Dylan sitting behind me, drawing fish on a paper plate. I cleared my throat and looked out at the group. We've all seen what unchecked power does. We've lived under it. But now that it's gone, we've got a choice. We can either leave a void or we can rebuild this community the way it should have been. A man in the third row raised his hand. You thinking of running the board? No, I said. I think we dissolve it entirely. That started murmurs, some skeptical, some hopeful. We don't need an HOA to tell us how to be neighbors. What we need is transparency, shared responsibility, and the ability to handle things like adults. The lake belongs to the public. Our homes belong to us. Let's keep it that way. A woman named Marcy, who used to run a small landscaping service before the HOA shut her down for unlicensed commerce, stood up. I'll draft the petition. Within 48 hours, we had over 80% of the neighborhood's signatures. By the following Monday, the new interim board and emergency panel set up by the county to oversee the HOA's dismantling announced that the organization would be officially dissolved within 60 days, pending final audits and legal wrap-ups. The lake became a centerpiece again, but this time for the right reasons. Kids fished from the docks without being told they needed permits. A retired teacher started organizing weekend cleanups with the local scout troop. Someone even painted a mural on the old HOA office's fence, a giant heron standing tall in the reeds, with the words, "We guard our own," in looping script across the bottom. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the end of the dock with Dylan when a familiar voice called out behind me. Thought I might find you here. It was Greg Doyle, sans windbreaker this time, off the clock, I asked. Mostly, he said, stepping onto the dock and tossing a folded document into my lap. Just wanted you to see this. It was a formal letter from the state attorney general's office. The final charges: 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of falsifying public documents, and 5 counts of financial misconduct. Cynthia and the others faced serious time. Looks like justice stuck, I said. More than that, Greg replied. Your case is going into state training manuals. They're using it as an example of how to dismantle a rogue HOA. I laughed, a short, surprised sound. Never thought I'd end up in a textbook. You didn't just win, Nick. You set a precedent. As he walked back toward his car, I looked out over the water. The sun was low, casting long streaks of gold across the lake. Dylan leaned against my side and tapped his sketch pad. Think we can paint the dock next? He asked. Yeah, I said. Whatever color we want. A light breeze skimmed the lake's surface as I sat at the edge of the dock, watching Dylan try to skip stones. The water was calm now, almost too calm, like the eye of a storm that hadn't passed as completely as we thought. Birds had returned to the reeds, and for the first time in years, I could hear laughter from across the cove, kids playing near the shore without anyone citing bylaws or snapping photos as threats. But something still didn't sit right. The HOA had been dismantled, the board members were facing charges, and the fraudulent maps were now part of a state casebook. Yet I kept thinking about the money. Over $200,000 didn't just vanish without someone helping it disappear. Sheila called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice sharper than usual. "I just got off the phone with the forensic accountant working the HOA audit," she said. "You're not going to believe this." I stood in the garage, wiping oil off my hands from a mower belt I was fixing. "Try me." They found transfers routed through a shell company in Delaware. The account wasn't just under Cynthia's name, it was jointly controlled by someone listed as Community Oversight Advisor. I leaned against the workbench. "That wasn't a position on the board." "No," she said. "But it was listed on several invoices submitted for consulting fees. The name attached, Kent Trailer." I dropped the rag. "Kent from 2 houses down, the same," she said. They cross-referenced the address on the filings with his property records. "It's a match." I looked through the open garage straight across the street where Kent's boxy white ranch had its blinds drawn tight. His truck hadn't moved in days. "You think he's skipping town?" I asked. "Not anymore," she said. "The Ag's office issued a warrant this morning. They're picking him up now." Within the hour, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into Kent's driveway. One officer knocked on the door while the other circled to the back. Kent opened up without a fight, but I could see from my front porch the way his hands shook as they cuffed him. His wife, Linda, stood at the threshold, arms crossed, her mouth moving fast. Neither officer acknowledged her. As they drove off, I walked back inside, the weight of it settling in. Kent had been at every HOA barbecue, every community meeting, always the first to volunteer for compliance walks. It made sense now he wasn't just enforcing the rules, he was cashing in on them. That evening, I met with Sheila and the county-appointed auditor, a man named Hal who looked like he hadn't blinked once since the Reagan administration. "We're building a separate case around Kent's involvement," he said, flipping open a binder filled with transaction records. "That shell company was used to process payments for fake landscaping services, maintenance reviews, and so-called legal consultations." "None of those ever happened," I said. "Correct," Hal replied. "We've confirmed the vendors don't exist." The invoices were generated using a template traced back to a computer inside the HOA office. Sheila pulled out a smaller folder. "And this is where it gets darker. Some of those funds were transferred again, this time into a private investment account. High yield offshore." "Money laundering," I said. "Precisely," Hal nodded. "We've already looped in federal investigators. This isn't just a local crime anymore. It's interstate financial fraud." I looked at Sheila. "Is there anything left of the HOA, legally?" "No, functionally. Only the mess they left behind." The state wrapped up the investigation within 3 weeks. Kent pled guilty to 5 counts of felony fraud and was sentenced to 10 years, with no chance of parole for the first 5. Cynthia's charges were expanded after her correspondence revealed she had deleted internal HOA emails that detailed the plan to remap the lake boundary. That bumped her sentence to 12 years, plus restitution. During the sentencing hearing, I showed up not as a witness but as a representative of the neighborhood. The judge allowed me to read a statement. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "I'm here to close a chapter that never should have been written. We trusted these people to manage a community. Instead, they built a machine designed to extract money and crush dissent. Today, that machine is dismantled, and tomorrow we write something better." The courtroom was silent when I stepped down. Not a single one of Cynthia's former allies had shown up. After the verdicts, the county returned full administrative oversight to the neighborhood, under a new model. A rotating council of 5 volunteers with no authority to fine, no power to enforce aesthetics, and no budget outside of basic maintenance. We held our first open election in the park near the lake. No speeches, no campaign posters, just neighbors talking, writing names on slips of paper, and dropping them in a repurposed tackle box. Marcy, the woman with the shut-down landscaping business, got the most votes. So did an older man named Ali, who'd quietly fixed people's fences for years without ever asking for a dime. I didn't run. I didn't need to. The goal was never to lead, just to make sure no one else ruled. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I was back on the dock, repainting the railing with Dylan. He was more focused on getting stripes of blue on his elbows than the actual wood, but I wasn't about to stop him. A voice called out from the trail behind us. I turned to see Doyle walking up with a satchel slung over his shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you again," I said, setting the brush down. He pulled out a slim folder and handed it to me. "Thought you'd want the official close-out report. Ag's office signed off this morning. The case is done." I flipped through the pages. Charges listed, sentences recorded, restitution amounts tracked. But what caught my eye was a final note scribbled near the bottom. No further HOA activity permitted under current subdivision code. "They actually changed the zoning?" I asked. "They did," Doyle nodded. "Your testimony helped push it through. This entire area is now protected from future private governance models. No HOA, no management corporations, no annexation attempts. It's locked down." I exhaled. "That's going to outlive all of us." "That's the point," he said. Before he left, he handed Dylan a small patch from his department. "For standing your ground," he said. Dylan grinned and pinned it to the front of his fishing vest. The seasons turned. Summer melted into fall, and the lake came alive with colors that hadn't shone this bright in years. People started building again, not fences or walls, but friendships, gardens, shared spaces. Someone converted the old HOA office into a lending library. A retired carpenter offered free workshops out of his garage. Kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sacs without being told their helmets didn't match the approved color scheme. And as for me, I went back to just being a dad, a neighbor, and the guy with the dock. No more legal filings, no more courtrooms. Just quiet mornings, paint-stained jeans, and the sound of Dylan laughing as he reeled in a fish half his size. The lake had always belonged to the people. Now, the neighborhood did too.